you helped restart the Kindest Corner. What was it like working with Ralph? One of my all-time favorite guys.
I'm this diehard Mets fan, and we're watching games, and we're watching Kindest Corner, and listening to him tell stories. And it was just, as a fan, it was incredible. And then suddenly to be able to work with him was this magnificent blessing. What I found out, and you knew a long time, Jay, is Ralph was a gentleman. As much as he was one of the superstars of this business, both in terms of television and radio, but also, of course, a Hall of Famer. He was just an average Joe who wanted to have a good time at the ballpark, and to spend time with him and be part of that relaunch of Kindest Corner was definitely a highlight of my career. It was fun. It reinvigorated him. He went on and did it for a lot longer, working with the Mets, but I think it was a big spark in the second half of his career. Working with Timmy, of course, was fabulous, but I think that was another spark for him.
Jay Harwood's special edition of Amazing Conversation with my old friend Matt Loughlin. Matt, the last time, God, before I forget, 19 years, voice of the Devils on radio. It's crazy. You've been doing this for 19 years. When was the last time we saw each other?
Wow, Jay. First off, thanks for the invite, and it's so good to see you again. I don't think it literally was Mike Piazza's last day at Shea Stadium, but that coincided with Madison Square Garden Network losing the Mets rights, and SNY started the next year, and they had their own people. I'm guessing we probably ran into each other at some functions between then and a short time later, but as paths diverge, things happen. And so it's been a long time.
Before there was Chris Cotter, before there was Kevin Burkhardt, before there was Steve Gelbs, there was Matt Loughlin. For 10 years, pre- and post-game shows at Fox Sports. It was MSG and Sports Channel. I forget all the different variables.
Yeah, there were a lot of them. It started out as Sports Channel, then, as you mentioned there, it started to morph into Fox Sports New York, Fox Sports Net New York, MSG2, all of those. But they date back to Sports Channel, and I was extremely fortunate that I was offered the opportunity to do it. I had been working in New Jersey for a local cable company. Suburban Cablevision was the name. Some wonderful people, some of whose names are familiar. Bob Lee, Bruce Beck, were part of the scene there, but also it was a place that developed great producers and directors and camera operators who were still working in the business. At any rate, we were doing some really good stuff, and it was high school sports, and I was having a blast, but I started to inch my way into the regional network area. Jerry Pissarro, our good friend from Sports Channel, gave me my first break, filling in on a few events. And eventually it worked out to the point where in 1996, I guess it was, I had been working there in 1995 full-time, doing a program called Game Time, which was the pregame show, but that was done in a studio on Long Island. And in 1996, summer of 1996, June, thereabouts, they decided to put people in the field to host those pregame shows. I was lucky enough to be chosen to do the Mets and the Devils, and the rest, they say, is history. So it started a great 10-year run, lots of fun, going to the World Series, Subway Series with the Yankees, seeing great players like Mike Piazza, 9/11, retirement of Jackie Robinson's number across Major League Baseball, Bill Clinton appearing at Shea Stadium. It was just a marvelous time for me and a great joy as I look back at it.
Matt, the Mets have been fortunate. We had a big Juan Soto signing, but you were in the middle where we got Mike in a trade. Tell what was it like, the excitement that caused when we got Mike in a trade with the Marlins was it 97 or 98? 97,
yeah,
right?
97, and it was incredibly.
I'm the marquee player in the game, best catcher ever lived, becomes a Met. It was pretty exciting times.
Oh, it absolutely was, and the rumors were there. He had been sent from LA to the Marlins, and no one expected that to last very long, and it did not. The question was, would the Mets be part of the bidding to get him? Would they pay the necessary price? And then ultimately, would they sign him to a contract? Because that was part of it. He was an impending free agent. So would you part with some assets, and then would you part with a lot of money that winter to get him to sign long term? And I just remember as the news broke, it was a Saturday. We had a Saturday afternoon game. He was coming up from Florida, and the buzz in the stadium was palpable. And I remember the fans outside waiting to see him. And as he got from the airport, I think you were in the car that brought him, if I recall, to
Can I
Shea
stop you 1
Stadium.
second? I almost got fired because of that. I wanted to make him feel well. I got a limo to pick him up, okay? And I got some people above me said, "Well, kind of, why are you picking this guy up on a limo?" I said, "We a new player, big player." So my limo and me we're all over the 11 o'clock news on Saturday against Milwaukee. Continue with your story. Sorry.
Well, and then that's a very funny story. But then he makes his way to the ballpark, and I remember you leading him from outside in the parking lot because we were following all this. This was a big bit of news that we were going to cover that day, and so I remember you leading him from the parking lot, along the outside of the building, and the fans all involved, and he makes his way in, and then his steps following him as I wasn't in the clubhouse. I'm sure we weren't allowed at that time, so he changes. But I remember following him out of the clubhouse, down that long runway from the clubhouse to the dugout, and then out into the field and the bright sunshine. It was such a brilliant day. It was lovely, and just seeing him in that bright white Mets uniform for the first time was incredible. And as you know, it didn't start out all that well. I mean, it did literally, but there were some struggles as he fought, I think, a little bit with living up to the billing, if you will. He had been an all-star superstar in Los Angeles, but it's a little bit of a different animal coming to this team. And the fans were expecting miracles. They didn't happen right away. And it was an uneasy marriage, to say the least. But by the end of that season, he was embraced. And then I remember that winter when the Mets inked him to that contract. And it's funny now, Juan Soto with those hundreds of millions of dollars. And Jay, I think it was 91 or 93 million.
91 million for 70 years.
7 years, right? And you thought, wow, we'll never see something like this again. But I do remember speaking with Mike at that news conference, and he kind of joked that, hey, this is going to be broken. Yeah, it's nice, but this is going to be broken soon. And I think a few weeks later, Kevin Brown signed a more expensive contract. And so quickly he went from the highest to the second highest.
It was crazy. Matt, in addition to the players, you work with some pretty good media people with the Mets. You helped restart the Kindness Corner. What was it like working with Ralph? One of my all-time favorite guys.
And I can understand why. So you have to remember, right? I'm a kid growing up in the metropolitan area. I was born in Manhattan. My family moved when I was 10 to New Jersey. We're a big sports family. My dad, a Yankees fan, lifelong Yankees fan. And for whatever reason, my siblings, my brother and sister, were kind of able to escape from that. It probably had something to do with the Yankees turning lousy in our formative years and the Mets becoming darlings through the Miracle Mets and Tom Seaver and that group. So at any rate, I'm this diehard Mets fan, and we're watching games and we're watching Kindner's Corner and listening to him tell stories. And it was just, as a fan, it was incredible. And then suddenly to be able to work with him was this magnificent blessing. What I found out, and you knew a long time, Jay, is Ralph was a gentleman. As much as he was one of the superstars of this business, both in terms of television and radio, but also, of course, a Hall of Famer. He was just an average Joe who wanted to have a good time at the ballpark, and to spend time with him and be part of that relaunch of Kindner's Corner was definitely a highlight of my career. It was fun. It reinvigorated him. He went on and did it for a lot longer, working with the Mets, but I think it was a big spark in the second half of his career. Working with Timmy, of course, was fabulous, but I think that was another spark for him.
What was your interaction with Tom Seaver while you were there?
Well, again, as I mentioned earlier, Tom was a hero of mine from an athletic standpoint and a baseball standpoint. Back when he broke in with the Mets, I had actually collected newspaper clippings. Now I'm dating myself, and Jay, you can appreciate this, of course, because we're same demographic. But when you were back page of the Post or the Daily News, or a story was written about you in the Times or Newsday or the Star Ledger, whatever it might have been, it was special. And I remember clipping out stories for some reason. And of course, he was a great player, but that rookie year, I just took to him. So I had this scrapbook that I kept, and I was young and it wasn't kept for very long, but this is the guy. This is my guy. And I remember when they announced that he was going to start working Mets games. And if the truth be told, Tom, very warm and engaging guy, and I can talk about that forever. But it's not that he was guarded, but he had to know who you were. He wasn't going to immediately embrace you and welcome you in. So a director at the time, John Moore, who was directing the Mets, he had worked with the Yankees, and they announced that Tom is joining us, and there was a spring training dinner down in Florida. And beforehand, I'm a little nervous because how's this going to work? I don't know. I've never met him before. And John said, don't worry about it. If you're in the circle, and basically by working with him, you'll be in the circle, he's the greatest guy. And that first dinner, he was like, hey, Matt, Tom, how are you? And I'm like, I can't believe I'm shaking hands with Tom Seaver. Warm and wonderful, told funny stories. And one of the real great ones, and I don't think video of this exists because it was kept private, but we're down there in spring training once, and I was doing the Devils at the time, so my visits to spring training were brief and they were not long at all. I mean, I was there for a day or two and then back doing hockey. But Gary Thorne is doing the games, and Tom says, hey, to me, Gary, and Kevin Meininger, mostly to Kevin Meininger, who was producing the games at the time, he said, come on, we're going to take BP on a backfield. Like, come on. It's crazy. Come on, Tom Seaver. And I think Gary believed it more than Kevin and I thought about it. Like, come on, Tom Seaver's not going to throw BP. This is Tom Seaver, Hall of Famer. Well, sure enough, as the day is ending, he grabs a bucket of balls. He says, let's get some bats. We go to this backfield. And I took BP against Tom Seaver. I think Kevin might have a picture. I have to ask him and get a copy of it. And I do remember Kevin sort of laced one. Now, he'll say when he hears this, he goes, no, it was a lace job. But he did hit a nice line drive, got into the outfield, and he kind of celebrated a little bit like, yeah, man, I did this against Tom Seaver. And then Tom gently buzzed him.
That's Tom.
Exactly.
That's Tom.
So you think, okay, you got a little BP dribbler, soft line drive off of me. You think you're big, wham. And he brushed him back, which was so much fun. I think I grounded one to second base because Tom could still bring it. But he was that kind of a guy. And he was Mr. Met in so many ways. Yeah. And he represented the early part of the franchise, not quite dating back to the Casey Stengel years, but certainly back to Gil. And wow. At one point he invited me to come out to his vineyard in California.
Yeah, I made that trip. Great. Yeah. You did.
Yeah. Nancy was so gracious to host us at lunch. And I'm not going to lie. I cried the day he died.
Me too. He's a good man. You were in on the beginning of David Wright's career, 2004. Going to retire his number, put him in the Hall of Fame. What were your early recollections of him, Matt? I mean, when did you think he would become David Wright, or in the early years, what were your original thoughts on David?
Well, he was a phenom coming up from the minors, right? He had done so much through the Mets system, and he's the next it guy who's going to join the Mets. But you never know, Jay. You've seen, hundreds of players who have either come up with great acclaim and it just doesn't work out, or the vice versa, right? They're not expected to do much, but they just work at it and they become really good players and have long acclaimed careers. So I certainly thought that he had all the goods. That was the reputation. And, we're talking about nice guys. Ralph Kiner, nice guy. Tom Seaver, wonderful human being. And David Wright was just genuinely a good dude. And he was happy to be there. He was happy every day at the ballpark. Sometimes in my role hosting the pregame show, you've got to go into the clubhouse, good, bad, or indifferent. You've got to get some sound before the game for that night's broadcast, or the night before you had to, be around when maybe they lost and the losing streak went longer than anyone would want. And some guys hide or they don't want to talk to you. We're all different. We're humans. Not David. David Wright was, if you needed him for something, you got it. And the work that he did in the community speaks volumes about the kind of guy he is. The only sad part is he never was able to win a World Series, and that the back just acted up and shortened what was a marvelous career. But what a joyful human being and incredible on the field, and another fan favorite to this day, of course.
Matt, so in your state, correct me if I'm wrong, you work with Dallas Green, Bobby V, Art Howe, and Willie Randall for a year. What was it like? Bobby V, good friend, a little crazy at times. But what do you remember about the day in 2000 when he got kicked out of the game and came back on the field with a mustache and and sat in the dugout? Remember that day?
Oh, absolutely. And I remember our pregame show the next day, because I don't think that, if I recall, that was not a whatever it was at the time, Fox Sports Net game. It might have been the over the air game. But at any rate, we had the video, and so we did this whole thing about the disguise he was wearing, and we were doing an Austin Powers. I did this Austin Powers imitation, like, "Oh, you international man of mystery," in our tease, and it wasn't edgy per se, but you didn't know how it would be received, and Bobby had a good time with it. I think I wish I could go back and work with him again, because I'll be honest, I was a little intimidated by him, because he was serious and quirky, but he had a sense of humor that I really didn't see as much as I should have. But the success he had on the field was fantastic. It was great to be back in the World Series. It was great to be relevant again in New York, and he was all a part of that. And what he also did, and from a media standpoint, maybe for you it was a little bit of a headache, but for us, there was always something. You had a story, and it was fun to follow. Not just the team, but I'm talking Bobby, because you never knew what he would do in Subway Series game. Get out there and show how the base runner was running out of the baseline, and he'd walk out nearly to the outfield, and all those things that he did just made him fun to follow. And the team, of course, was great too.
Max, so next year is the 25th anniversary of the 2000 team. For me, it's one of the most unappreciated teams in Mets history. We win 90-plus games. I think we beat the Dodgers and the Cardinals, right, to get into the playoffs, and lose to a great Yankee team in 5 games, I think by a total of 5 runs. The game 1, Otimo didn't run, and we lost in extra innings. But, what do you remember about the excitement in the Subway Series?
Well, I do remember when it was going to happen, when the Mets had advanced. I remember riding through New Jersey, just blasting the radio and thinking, how lucky am I to be able to cover a Subway Series? Now, the Subway Interleague games had returned a few years earlier, but not the same, right? This is the Subway Series. This is the Mets and the Yankees. And of course, they were the Kings. They were in the midst of their great run under Joe Torre. But I thought, how lucky am I to be able to do this? And what I remember, of course, is the pomp and circumstance surrounding that. But that team, you're right, Jay, that team was underrated. I think that just because you don't win it all doesn't mean you weren't a great collection.
I agree with 100%, man, 100%.
And just to get off baseball for a moment, like, were the Buffalo Bills not great for going to 4 Super Bowls in a row? I mean, they were, but they just don't get the acclaim because they didn't win. Anyway, back to the Mets baseball. But what a collection of players. Piazza, of course, was the sun around which all the planets kind of orbited, but he also made sure that everyone had their place too. And so whether it was Johnny Franco or whether it was Robin Ventura, there were just all those great players that made that they were a true professional team, right? And they had a great deal of success. Unfortunately, they just fell short. I hated the fact that the Yankees celebrated on Shea Stadium's turf, winning the World Series. I didn't mention Al Leiter. You mentioned some names, you wind up forgetting others, and that's a terrible thing to do. But I just remember, it didn't get off to a good start, that series, and the Mets just couldn't find their traction the rest of the way. But I do remember how those years, even the year before they go to the playoffs, the Mets, and of course in 2000, and it carried over to 2001 as well. I mean, Shea Stadium would literally rock. I mean, it was packed every night. The fans were vocal. The fans were animated. It was a New York experience, and every night Jay just rocked. And literally that, when things went well, this is what was happening
No
in that
question.
building. The stands were bouncing up and down, and you could literally, it was like almost like a mild earthquake. You could feel the building move, and it was an incredible experience.
Matt, in your role as the Devils, do you still have time to follow the Mets? I mean, in hockey, it does elope a little bit. Do you still have time to follow what goes on in city and now?
Oh, absolutely. Now, not to the degree that I once did, partly because it's not my job anymore, and partly because of what you said. My Devils responsibilities require a lot of time. But yeah, I certainly follow what the Mets have been doing, and I celebrated along with my family, diehard Met fans. All three of the boys have made many ventures to Citi Field over the years, playoff games, opening day, all that sort of stuff. And their celebration of Juan Soto's signing was heard loud and clear. We shared in that. I've got some friends who are great Mets fans. And so, yeah, we share the ups and downs still. I miss the field. I miss the gig. I miss being involved in the arena the way I once was, but I don't miss too much about what the Mets do. And my friends are still working the games, whether it's, Gary Cohen doing the games or whether it's Keith doing the games. I knew Ronnie, but he came into SNY. He was down in Washington. And of course, Howie Rose, Chris Majkowski, the engineer. I saw him just the other day at a Rangers Devils game. So yeah, the people I know and love still do the games. And so I ride that roller coaster. Yep.
Matt, your team last time were in first place in the Metro Division. I'm not a great hockey fan. I mean, the Hughes brothers are pretty good, more than pretty good. You got to be happy the way the team is playing this year, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
how much rivalry is between without jinxing you, you're way above the Rangers and the Islanders. Is it still a
Uh,
little rivalry between the three you guys?
It's much more Devils and Rangers, to be honest. And that's because they've met so many times in the playoffs. And the Rangers, right? They're the big brother. I mean, no matter how long the Devils will be around or the Islanders have been around, the Rangers will certainly have a longer history. Maybe not more celebrated in terms of championships, but nonetheless, they've been around a long time in the fabric of the hockey world and the New York City sports scene, more so than the Islanders and the Devils. So it's the Devils Rangers that's really the big rivalry from a Devils fan standpoint. Not so much the Islanders. They only played once in the playoffs, and that was back in 1988. And that's where the real rivalries in hockey begin, is playing against each other in the postseason. So there is a rivalry because of the geographical proximity, but not nearly what it is like to play the New York Rangers. So
Now,
that's the big kahuna.
what's travel like with hockey? Baseball's every day. What do you play? You play 2, 3 games a week? I mean, how many on the average? How many games do you play a week?
Yeah, it's usually 3 or 4. Once in a while you get that 2 games in a week situation, but usually 3 or 4. The Devils are fortunate because there are a lot of Eastern teams, and so the travel is not the same. We do crisscross the continent. There are teams in Vancouver and LA and San Jose, so there is that travel to the Pacific time zone. But the travel is a lot easier. One of the things I do miss in terms of the travel situation is that you would be in a city for 2 or 3 days with baseball, and you could get to see the city a lot more. Today we're recording this. I'm in Columbus, and it's an off day. The team's not practicing. Unfortunately, it's raining outside, and so I don't know how much visiting I will do to the city. But I try to get out wherever I go. So the travel is a lot more in and out in hockey than it is in baseball. But again, because of the Eastern time zone, so many teams here, I'm back home
And
in
you,
my bed by 1 o'clock.
and your color guy's great Chico Rush. How is he to work with?
He is a blast. We talked about Ralph Kiner earlier, and Chico is in that realm. Inordinately popular player, won a Stanley Cup, not a Hall of Famer, but had he stayed with the Islanders, he might very well have been, but he wound up getting traded to a team that was in its infancy and then ultimately became the Devils, and the wins didn't come as frequently as they had with the Islanders. But he's a personality. He takes the sport seriously because he loves it, but he takes life and celebrates. And so it's a lot of fun to work with him. It's the Phil Rizzuto, it's the John Madden, it's the Ralph Kiner of hockey that I'm working with, which makes it so much fun. Because Jay, as you know, there's a lot that rides on it. People's jobs ride on the success and failure of a team.
No
But
question.
from our standpoint, the broadcast standpoint, it's about entertaining those who are listening in this case, or back in the day watching, trying to make those few hours fun. And Chico makes it fun.
Matt, let me ask you, is there one favorite Met memory, one player, if the 10 years you worked here that sticks out in your mind, any one game?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I come back when people ask me that, and sure, going to the World Series was great. Watching the stars of that era perform and the Mets returning, as I said earlier, to prominence was great. But truthfully, 9/11, the game returning, when New York hosted the Atlanta Braves after that tragedy, at times when I tell the story, it still chokes me up because of
100%.
all that happened that day. But to see what that game meant to the city in the midst of all this tragedy, to see what the Mets did, and there were other teams, it wasn't a solo effort, but we're talking Mets baseball here, to see how the Mets embraced the community as they always did. It became a rallying point for so much good at that time. And then finally, Mike Piazza hits that incredible home run that brought that game that started on a very somber note. And then slowly, as the game went on, the fans could release some of their energy, and Liza Minnelli to New York, and all that stuff that happened in that game. And then Mike hits this home run that rockets off the platform of the Cameron Center Field, and Shea Stadium is doing this. And I remember Craig Sager was working the game for Atlanta's TV at the time, and the game's over. The Mets have won. And I'm going to grab Mike in the dugout. And here comes Craig Sager. And, he had been doing basketball, was a little bit more of a national figure, but was still doing local baseball. And I remember my manager yelling in my ear, "Do not let that man get that interview." And I'm like, "Kevin, there's no way he's getting that interview. We're going to have Mike right here, because this was a Mets moment. This was a New York moment." And just to be able to kind of have a conversation. And I mean, Mike was emotional too. And he was flummoxed by everything that had happened, and that was such a magical moment.
Matt, I've been with the Mets 45 years. I've been fortunate to have a World Series ring in '86, All-Star game, a couple of stuff. But for me, when I die, my epitaph would be part of that 2001 team. I mean, we're just a great from the beginning when the two teams embraced on the field. I'm sure Bobby Cox and Bobby V hated each other. They literally hated each other. And for that game, with everybody, embracing, I remember after the game, Chipper Jones said, "I hate to lose to the Mets, but this is a good time to lose to the Mets." It's something, I'll never forget. And the game was great, but like I say, all this stuff, we had such a bunch of good guys, Venturas, the Zeals, the Vance Wilsons, the Fonzies. We did such good work, and it was just something I'll never forget. I can't believe in 26, it's 25 years coming up. It's crazy.
It is. And just the sadness is still there. The memories are still there, but boy,
I still get goosebumps when I talk about it, Matt. When I still remember Liza Minnelli embracing Jay Payton in the on-deck circle in the seventh inning. But listen, Matt, you're a great friend. You're a good guy, and I'll never forget the time we worked together. And I hope the Ranger fans and Island fans forgive me. I hope the Devils win the Stanley Cup this year.
Well, Jay, I appreciate that sentiment, and then hopefully that happens. It would be nice, of course. But I do want to say this. I know, and the people who know you know this, but the people who only know you as to what you do may not. But you are a gracious, humble, but excellent at what you do person, good human being. And I do remember when I came to join, look, it was different, right? Sports Channel was changing what they were going to do, and we were going to put more demands on your time, but you never failed to deliver, even in hard times when the Mets were in a losing streak, or maybe something was said on the air that was not received well in the clubhouse. You made sure we got our job done. And you're a good man, Jay.
Well,
and people should know that.
And good luck the rest of the way. And when your season's over, we're late in the playoff run. Hope to see you at Citi Field.
I would love to do that, Jay. Thank you so very much for asking me.
Thanks, Matt.